Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Talking about things. What am I going to say? I have to have an opening here. Hello, everyone. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Scott Schiaffo. Scott's an actor, musician, composer, author, and counselor. What else would we say about you?
That's actually really, plenty. I mean,
today he's here to talk to me about his life, the universe, and everything. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
I'm going to keep that as the cold opener. Then we can just get going.
I have the master's, and I did the. Oh God, I'm drawing a blank. What do you before you graduate? You do your.
Oh, you do your internship. Yeah.
I did the internship, but after I graduated, that was the end of it. I didn't go into the field at all, really.
I know, but technically, you have your counseling degree. How's
right,
that? Yeah.
And I still have my NCC, I still got my national accreditation. Although I owe the dues soon to keep that up. To keep the NCC.
Oh yeah, so you basically took what the exam, right. And then you passed that, and you were starting to work, and you didn't quite get the 3 million hours that you have to have post graduation.
Not close. Just because of my whole other situation with my heart and my because I was on disability for quite a while for my heart.
Yeah.
It was like a very expensive labor of love to get that degree because I love the field.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we could talk about today, I mean, we kind of set this up earlier when we kvetched about like what are we going to do and what would we talk about? And the idea, of course, would be to kind of talk about your life trajectory. You are someone who's in recovery successfully for many, many years. And also, we're both, I'm a former actor. You're still acting out there. I mean, you're still pretty heavily involved in creative stuff, music, doing scores and stuff, and your own music. Wrote a book, right, about somewhat autobiographically, right, about your experiences when you weren't in recovery.
Right. Yeah. It's more like a poor man's Charlie Bukowski trip, is what it was.
Yeah, but still a fine little book. I mean,
Oh, I'm very happy. I'm very happy it finally came out because it resonated with people in a way I never saw coming.
Let's get that title out there. What is the title?
Vicious Dog. Yeah, Vicious Dogs Attack Me in Sleepless Nights of Summer.
Okay, that's not a good summer. It is kind of Bukowski-esque. Yeah. Well, how did this book resonate? What is it specifically about? And maybe we can kind of like use that as a launching off point.
I think what has happened, which I didn't see coming when I was releasing it, is it doesn't promote the lifestyle and it's not apologetic for the lifestyle. It just sort of is. It's sort of like an alcoholic junkie memoir. A good 5, 6, 7, 8 years worth of bizarreness under the influence. But because we all know, thankfully, for my sake mostly, I survived and I'm okay now, somehow there's a recovery element in it that's not technically in it, but because I am okay now and I'm out and about and active, people realize that I recovered, and I think that the recovery element was touching people in a way I didn't foresee because it's not a recovery book.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, how is it resonating with people and how is it touching people in that way?
Well, a lot of people who have given me feedback and reached out to me over the years who have purchased the book and and a lot of them suffer with their own addictions, and the feeling of knowing somebody that they, because you know how it is. It's kind of like with something like a Clerks, which I got incredibly lucky as an actor, as a character actor, to be in a film where I played a character that's fairly memorable. The fans,
the Chewlie's gum rep, yeah.
Right. The fans really kind of remember him, and he's kind of an asshole, but yet people really like him and like me as a person, which I always found interesting because the character is pretty despicable. But what's the point I'm trying to make here? Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, we were talking about the how the book resonated with the people, and then we kind of got into
right. A lot of people who suffer were identified with the fact that somebody they know from the screen, because people feel like they really do know you with a film like that, because it's the kind of movie that if you're a fan, you've sat through it like Rocky Horror, like dozens of times in your life.
Right, yeah.
So you really begin to feel like you know the people on screen, which of course you don't at all. But they felt so close to all the characters that to find out one of them was really drowning in alcoholism and drug addiction and made their way through it by whatever grace you want to say, I think it's given the people that are suffering or have had friends and family suffer something very tangible to sort of identify with and to have hope for, I believe.
Yeah. Well, it shows you that people suffer. Basically, everybody from all walks of life, that we suffer from our own internal vicious dogs, right? Yeah.
Without a doubt. Well, nobody gets out of this gig without, I don't care what kind of childhood you had, storybook or nightmarish, everybody has their shit. Everybody. And if you don't deal with it, it eventually deals with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to wrestle with your own demons, right? Or angels. And it's just nobody's unaffected by pain and suffering, right? It's the hero's journey, and hopefully you turn it into a hero's journey rather than just kind of like stagnant, right? If we all reach those points in our life where I think things work as coping skills or ways of getting by in life that don't work anymore. But sometimes some of us don't realize it until very later on that it ain't the way to go 24/7, right? Or anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's having that insight and figuring out you need to get your crap together. But you did, and the book is resonating with people, and you just created an audio book of it, correct? You did recorded all of the chapters, right?
Correct. Thank you to the pandemic.
You had a lot of time on your hand. Is that what
right?
You're saying?
Exactly. Finally, because originally, years ago, when the book was first released, there was a budget and everything. We were going to do a thing where there was going to be a lot of guest readers, actors, friends of mine were going to read, and comics I knew were going to read, and no A-listers per se. Maybe one or two people were bigger names than others. But it was going to be all guest readers. But Audible, fast forward, Audible of today was not what it was when the book came out. Audible was not the monster that it is now. And Audible strongly suggested to me that if you're going to do that, that's fine, but do that as a novelty release. Do the author version, just you reading it, because you're the guy and you're in those films and people are going to want to hear that. And if you're going to do the other thing, do that more as a novelty version.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked about Clerks a little bit. What are some of the other things you've been working on, just in case people want to check them out? I know you were in Vulgar, right, which was like a early 2000.
Right. That was another hairy film, crazy independent film by a guy named Brian Johnson, who's part of the Kevin Smith world. Lionsgate released that, and Very controversial film.
Yeah, it was about a clown who's like abused, right, or raped.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I go head to head with Brian O'Halloran, which is kind of nice. Our two characters are going head to head, and I've got the big standoff scene with the police. I mean, what character actor doesn't want to have a big standoff with the police?
True.
Telling them fuck off and you won't take me alive type shit. And what's funny, it's funny to me now, but I didn't tell too many people at the time. Granted, it wasn't real close to some of my incidents, but I was no stranger to getting in the crosshairs of the men in blue back in those days. Like, that was not that big a stretch.
Yeah. Okay. So you you did your prep work.
Yeah. No, I had plenty of years of research.
Well, yeah, I've had some rough nights. I think anybody who's like acted, it's kind of like you're on a manic high for a while, and then you go into a depression, and then you there's a lot of booze, or there can be some drugs involved in after parties if you're doing theater or movies or things. It's kind of a crazy scene. Is that how you found yourself kind of like getting into trouble?
Well, that's a part of it. I think, personally, I think I was destined for a number of reasons. It's in the blood. My father was a slamming alcoholic. I had uncles on my mother's side of the family that were slamming alcoholics. There was a lot in the family. So I do believe heavily in the genetic predisposition. So I know that was ripe and ready to happen. And so I probably, no matter what I had done or what paths I may have taken, I think I would have fell into it because it was a love affair as soon as I sort of found it, in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people speak of it like that, like it's almost like a girlfriend. I mean, a lot of my training was in drug and alcohol facilities, oddly, because I've had my own experiences with those things. But it is spoken of like it's, like your habit can be kind of like a relationship. Yeah. And a twisted one.
Oh, sure. Very dysfunctional, obviously. But it's like, there's a funny line in Clerks where Dante is talking with Randall he's talking about his childhood, and his mother said that he was one never to rock the boat he would sit in a dirty diaper rather than learn to potty train. And this is the character.
Yeah.
And a lot of us will sit in our own shit forever before we take what it takes to get out of that shit. Like it's familiar, and that's the unfamiliar is what scares the shit out of most alcoholics and addicts. The familiar, people wonder, why does he keep doing this? His life's insane. He ends up in jail, and he ends up on blackouts where he comes to in places he doesn't remember. But as mad as full of madness as that is, that was familiar enough to be comfortable after a while. The unknown was more uncomfortable.
Well, I think that metaphor applies not just to people with addiction problems, but like people of all walks of life. I think everybody just kind of simmers in your own diapers, right? Until they get uncomfortable, until the diapers get really cold and uncomfortable. Yeah.
Right. Or you start chafing.
Start chafing and they get leaky and stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's gross. But I think it is very much a metaphor for how people work. And yeah, just unfortunately, it can kind of take a turn for the worse in other incidences. I wonder, like, what got you? I don't think we've ever really talked about this, Scott. Like, what got you into going into counseling? Why did you decide to take that route? You love the field, and I'm just curious. I assume that's one of the reasons why, but why?
Into counseling to study it, or into counseling in my personal life? Because that was a big part of it.
Well, to study it, but I guess maybe that's what got you into wanting to be a counselor, because you took up counseling and psychotherapy. Yeah.
Right. I was in therapy a large chunk of my adult life. And although, I struggled and I never really cleaned up fully until I finally did, I got the most clarity and the most enjoyable, sobriety through one-on-one counseling over the 12-step programs and the meetings and those type of things. Was never a big fan of the 12-step programs, but I felt like I got more out of one-on-one therapy. I had a handful of very good one-on-one therapists throughout the years, and I just fully believed in the process. I was a big Carl Rogers guy, and although that could be in the wrong hands, that could be deadly in the sense of unconditional positive regard for somebody who's either a narcissist or like just so self-absorbed, that's not going to help. But positive, unconditional positive regard for somebody who's kind of being told they're a piece of shit from just about everybody is one of the most exhilarating and refreshing things you could have or feel.
Yeah, just being heard, right? I was speaking to somebody, I had a guest on a couple of days or a day ago, and we were talking about how to hold space for people who might be depressed and suicidal, and what to do for them. And my feeling is largely if you can just be there and listen, because they don't feel attended to, or there's an immense amount of shame for the feelings that they have that are dragging them into that kind of headspace where they want to kill themselves, right? And part of it is accepting that they do want to, not that you want to, convince them that it's a good idea or anything, but to hold that space so they feel heard. So many of us, we're so interconnected now with this, that, and the other screen, but we're so disconnected from each other as human beings, right? And
absolutely. And, I think a big part of it, too, is what you touched on, being heard, being genuinely heard. And most people, in my experience and also from my own experience, you want to be heard and understood. We don't want the answer necessarily. We don't want to be fixed. This is what the bad thing. The issue with men and mansplaining is a big thing in the sense of men fall into a terrible trap with women where instead of listening to their woman go on about something that's bothering them, they try to fix it and put a Band-Aid on it and move on. And that's not what's wanted. They just want to be heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes it can be the other way around. Like, I know people who have relationships where the woman wants to come up with a solution, depending on, I guess it depends on how much of these quote unquote masculine or feminine archetype or aspects of the personality there. Like somebody whose wife might be a professional or just has comes from a family of fixer-uppers, right? Where you fix a problem and you don't talk about your emotions. So it's not always men, but I think, yes, by and large, it is what men want to do, which is, of course, to not go into emotional stuff, right? I think men, we don't like to feel things. We start to feel emotions, we get off balance, we're not supposed to have those things.
Yeah, well, so much that's inbred in us. And I, raised by a very strong single mother, I was to this day, I still am in a lot of ways, pretty much an emotional, nervous wreck. I know how to handle it now, and I'm much better at it than I have been most of my life. But I'm an extremely emotional, extremely anxiety-ridden individual, even on a good day. And not sure where I'm going with that, but you're right. It's
well, it sounds like you're in touch with those emotions, but sometimes to the point where they're overwhelming.
Right, absolutely. And it's important that you're just feeling the right amount of empathy and the right amount of support, and nobody necessarily is trying to fix all your problems. They just want to say, hey, man, that must suck. I feel for you. I'm sure. I believe most of us do know somewhere in there. For me, with therapy, my ultimate goal would have been, once if I were in practice, aside from the positive, the unconditional positive regard, was I think the ultimate thing I wanted to do was help somebody learn how to navigate themselves to their own solutions.
Well, yeah, that is kind of therapy in a nutshell. Yeah.
Right. But there is other therapies where people really want to be told what to do. Give me A, B, and C. Some people want that in a pragmatic way. There are some people, and there are some therapists who work that way.
I think that you're kind of looking at like rational emotive behavioral therapy,
right,
or CBT or ACT. Right. But those, you know what? If you watch those people work, like the people, if you've ever watched Aaron Beck or Judith Beck, for instance, the CBT gods, or two of the creators of it, or if, David Burns, right? He's even like gone away from that. He's like, I'm not really CBT. I just was part of that crowd. It seemed to work. When they do it with panache. And if you watch like Judith Beck, if you watch her doing therapy on video, she's doing it. She looks like a Carl Rogers. She looks like a person-centered or client-centered therapist for a great period of time while she's doing the work, right? So, and then she might bring in like a Socratic dialogue to do something. It's a lot more subtle than it's the way it's being trained, because
right,
it's this it has been manualized because it's got all those like Likert scales and ways to measure things pre and post. So all the insurance companies were freaking out about how great it was, but the efficacy studies,
you bring up a great point. They want results within a window.
Well, it's impossible.
Insurance companies, of course. Yeah.
But you basically, you were on to something. I think that's basically what you would have been doing in psychotherapy to one degree or level or another. I mean, if somebody comes in and they want solution oriented stuff, or they want something that's more CBT kind of oriented solutions, right? The trick is, and I hope I don't lose anybody from my caseload who might be spying in on this. The trick is to convince them, to show them a little hope with those techniques, but then to kind of bring them around to the fact that they still have to accept who the hell they are, right? Which is the unconditional positive regard, right? The therapeutic alliance, whatever, the transference, countertransference stuff, like however you deal with that. So, I think that the nuts and bolts of therapy is still the same.
Sure.
Yeah. But so you did the counseling degree, and it sounds like some health conditions didn't allow you to continue with that as a like to launch into getting those hours and then setting up your own practice.
Right. Or going, chasing after the LAC or the LPC rather, as opposed to even the LAC was a daunting task because of the disability. And then I had kicked around the idea of just doing pro bono and was even offered a gig at the place I did my internship. I love everything about the talk therapy field. I just always have. I believe in it. I believe that for me, I guess this is how maybe you can agree, being an actor too. I got into acting because I'm fascinated by people, and I'm fascinated by my own behavior, let alone other people's behavior. And studying it and observing it, and the key is you're not always going to understand what's behind somebody's MO, and playing characters that, no matter how possibly despicable, have other redeeming qualities. We're human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I basically got into psych because of acting, right? I was looking. I think we were talking about this earlier. I was interested. I was really interested in Michael Chekhov's techniques. I didn't study his techniques under anybody who was training people in them, but the idea of using like imagery, it's very much like hypnotic techniques, right? And I said, well, hypnosis is cool. I was studying some NLP stuff, and I thought, well, I'll do some hypnosis. So I got certified by an organization that technically they'll give anybody a diploma, that kind of a thing. And I worked, but I was very diligent about like pursuing like the heavy hitters within the field who were actually like psychiatrists or whatever, like Milton Erickson, right? So I basically worked at a Positive Changes franchise in Manhattan and in Bay Ridge, beautiful Bay Ridge, doing hypnosis sometimes 12 hours a day with people, just mini short-term therapy stuff with people, and open up my own practice, right? Because it's not regulated in most states, I think, outside of Texas. So I was doing these mini therapy sessions with like very just simple, brief behavior changes, but I was seeing people who obviously had deep personality issues that were potentially life-threatening, and I would have to like tell the family or the person, here's a card for a psychiatrist. You go see them and talk to them. I obviously saw what was not within my bandwidth of helping people, and that's largely what got me back into. I tossed myself into the role, you could say, of being a therapist, and I enjoyed it. So I tested the waters pretty heavily, having had some therapy myself earlier as well, but I tested the waters pretty heavily in that role. So it just seemed to fit well. And yes, I think there's a lot of overlap between how therapy works when it's working well, and people, when graduates from programs step into that role and they embody themselves wholly. I think there's a lot of similarities between like acting and therapy. That doesn't mean you're putting anybody on when you're doing therapy. Right. But there are some elements to it that are very similar.
Absolutely. And I think I was so excited for you to watch you continue to grow and do and pursue it after working with you in the film, because you were one of my favorite people in that cast. And that's
thanks.
True. That's you had that other level of something. I mean, there's an intangible you can't always put your finger on for me with other actors. And it kind of jumps through the screen. It jumps through the camera. It's something that I think either somebody has or they don't have. It can't really be taught. That's how I feel about some of that. And I saw a lot of that in you. Okay. I also, and I loved your, the piece you did, with the tome.
The spoken word thing?
No, I'm not forgetting the name of it, where you were the Antiquarian.
Yeah. You're dragging up my acting past here on my podcast. Right. Yes. No, the Hapless Antiquarian. That was a wonderful piece. Well,
really, visually, and without dialogue, you really brought it.
Well, I am a teenage Ed Gorey character. Yes. I belong. I think I belong secretly. I stepped out of the pages of Amphigoria or whatever. I think everything came together with that film. My friend Anthony Penta, who's now directing. He's directing and producing an indie documentary, which is really cool, called We Kill for Love. It's about the erotic thriller market. Precisely the thing that back when Clerks came out, right? When I saw that in the theater when it first came out, right? Like 92 or 94 or something. 93, yeah.
94 theatrically, yeah.
Yeah, theatrically. And I saw it in the State Theater in Ann Arbor, right? And like, wow, this is cool. Like indie films. But at the same time, there was this whole like burgeoning, straight to home video erotic thriller market, right? Which is when Blockbuster was still around. And so Tony's doing this really pretty in-depth interview with all the directors and the actors from that whole period, which almost got swept away. I mean, except for I think there's some interest in film criticism about that genre and how it's distinct from film noir and other things. But
sure.
Yeah, so he's doing that, but his humble start was things like an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation of The Hound, which is verbatim, and that Hapless Antiquarian film. Yeah. So
yeah, that was great stuff. It really was, and it takes a deeper mind to be doing that as opposed to a lot of, I don't want to call other, insult anybody and say other things are fluff, but that's a sort of a what's the word I want? There was a sophistication to that production.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, you have to think about it. It's a riff on Ed Gorey's like little tomes, right? And it is a book about a book, and it's got a kind of Lovecraftian book in it. It's got a whole lot going on. There's a lot of meta stuff there.
Right. It's beautiful too. A film about something, because now where we are with books and 20, 30 years later now, bookstores have almost all but vanished, and I do miss the old days of bookstores and record stores and DVDs and laser discs and everything.
God, yeah. I mean, speak of the 90s, man. I used to work in bookstores. I worked at the first Borders Books that was in Ann Arbor. I mean,
wow.
It was a strange. It was great. I mean, it was great. It was just amazing. It didn't make me a whole lot of money, but I had a good time. It was a lot of fun, and cool people. And just the fact that people would go in and talk about ideas, right? A place where you could get a cup of coffee, you could hang out, you could ask somebody who worked at a bookstore who probably was knowledgeable in your subject matter. Yeah, it was a great place.
Exactly.
Great time, I guess. For the landline years.
Yeah, I tell you, man. In fact, I was just talking to Carrie, my partner in crime, my lovely Jewel Carey. Technology, even recently, like we had been doing web design for a number of years back in the very late 90s into the early 2000s, and we kept it right up to current day. But I didn't stick with technology with that. I went to the music and the film technology, still did web work, but I didn't keep up with it. But the point I'm getting to is never did I see how the phone has become everything. Like our phones are our computers and our cameras.
Yeah, and the cameras
edit movies on their phones. That's just so bonkers.
It's insane. They're like little Star Trek technologies, right? And plus they're transitional objects. You can't leave home without it. It's like a teddy bear.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. What's going on for you now? Like, what are projects that are in the works?
Well, I do have. Probably will be involved on some level in Kevin's Clerks 3 sequel, Kevin Smith. I did a lot of work over COVID, actually. I was as part of a couple of films that actually were produced and were distributed and got their audience, and a web series, which was a lot of fun. But I was doing more of the music for that than I was on camera. I'm very fortunate. I stay busy. A lot of it is indie wackiness and whatnot, but I love it, and I feel fortunate and blessed that although I've always juggled a number of things to keep the nut covered, as they say, that I've been able to do that with other choices, obviously. I was never married. I don't have any dependents. So that keeps me very free to have that sort of feast or famine lifestyle, which it is. Sometimes there's fun money. Sometimes there's no fun money. But I love the fact that I get to stay in the creative arts and things like the convention worlds and a lot of promotional things that came up over the years as the culture changed. Clerks became a thing that I was able to monetize through many different means, as opposed to the old school way, which was you got paid to be an actor and then you got your residuals. Mm-hmm. A new model was a film reaches a certain popularity and all of a sudden on the convention circuit, you become a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And then there's revenue streams to be made through that.
Awesome.
So
yeah. So selling your book, for instance, or things like that. Yeah.
So, doing the meet and greet, you sell the items with the meet and greet and the selfies and personalizing the items, and because let's face it too, you could probably identify with this. As a child, all I could think about was music or acting, and like fantasizing, like, oh my God, to have a career would be so amazing. Like just the notion that somebody would ask for an autograph was mind blowing. But then you fast forward 30 years later, and now there's this whole culture where it's a revenue stream.
Yeah.
Which I never saw that coming, which at first was a little uncomfortable for me because it just seemed, because we grew up at a different time, Well, but then you're on the dais with people like Adam West and William Shatner.
I was going to say, yeah.
The clock is, the meter's running with those cats. You know what I mean?
But like Star Trek conventions were big back in the 70s, man. I remember reading magazine articles about like people going to these conventions and thinking, wow, I wouldn't do it now per se, but like back then when I was like really into Star Trek, the first series, that would have been cool to meet, Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner and whatnot, George Takei. But that's been going on forever. I think actors have I think your eyes open up in a field, past what's the silly term now? You jump the shark pretty quick, or you push the envelope, or whatever the term is, right? Like you figure out that there's more to life than just being in front of a camera or on a stage, right? With what you can do.
Right. And because of the way things have changed so drastically in the business, DVDs almost being dead, and that was a big revenue stream for a lot of film companies and for actors. Direct to DVD used to be a very big thing. Now it's direct to streaming, but the profits that are available from streaming as opposed to the tactile DVDs are night and day. You're getting like micro pennies per stream as opposed to with a DVD, you literally would, the dollars and cents of it has changed amazingly, crazy.
I agree. Like, many years, like, oh God, it's like 2012, I did something through, and it's a very popular platform. I won't mention it, but like I put an album out, and a few people bought it, and I don't think I actually paid off what I put into like purchasing equipment and whatnot to make it. But the worst thing about it is that platform now no longer will sell an album for you. So like if anybody, so like I don't think you can actually buy an album. I think maybe you can through Amazon, but it's all streaming now. Who the hell's going to buy that album or any album? I was listening to the Stones last week and Iggy Pop, and I didn't buy it, man. I'm just streaming it.
Right. Right. You're absolutely right.
And I know what they get per stream. It's just like a million people are going to listen to Iggy Pop all over the world. They're not going to listen to me, right?
But and even Iggy is not getting those royalty checks that he would have if they were actually buying discs. It's a completely different world.
Yeah.
And it's funny you bring up Amazon. They cut their program this summer.
Oh.
So now it's all streaming, and I have a number of titles on Amazon, DVDs and audio CDs. And now it's streaming only, no more hard copies.
Wow. Okay. So
heartbreaking.
Yeah. So that's an income revenue for the artists. I think that basically whoever controls he who controls the spice controls the universe, and the spice, my friend, is the gatekeeper, and whatever the platform is. Yeah. They're gonna make the cash. The Baron Harkonnens of the world are gonna make the cash.
Bezos.
Yeah. So when I was curious, you mentioned the conventions, and talking about the book there. What's your interaction? Because we've had somebody on, Susanna Flores, who wrote a book about the Wolverine as a PTSD survivor, and she kind of interweaves her own PTSD survival story in it. And she's gone to comic book cons and sold and plugged her book, but she mentions a lot of people coming up and said, just being in tears saying, I finally understood why I was behaving this way, and I'm not alone. So do you get kind of some of that from Vicious Dogs?
I do, actually. And again, it's people, and the stigma with alcoholism and drug addiction is it's still a pretty terrible thing. Alcoholism and drug addiction elicits some of the most fierce resentment and anger and confusion from family members and society that you could imagine. And it's a terrible, terrible thing because, yes, the alcoholic and addict needs to be accountable for what they do. Yet by the same token, so much of what they do, somebody else is behind the wheel. So it's a heartbreaking scenario, and families just get crushed by it. But I've gotten a lot of that over the years since the book has come out. And to me, I didn't see that coming at all. But it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to get to a deeper level of communication with the fans when it was appropriate, whether it was through a Facebook message or in person at a convention. And I'm very open about speaking about all of it. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're able to touch people that way, and they can put a face to a name that they admire through a really awesome film and an awesome career, and see precisely how everyone's human.
Yes, and we're super frail.
Yeah. But at the same time, in our frailty, I think that's where we find our resilience, our strength. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about writing a bit of an autobiography? I mean, I think we mentioned that before, talking about your recovery and your experience and whatnot, maybe through the lens of your counseling education.
Yeah, on and off now for the last 7 or 8 years. I had actually begun a project with there's an artist named Scott Meany, who I've done a lot of work with, who's just a phenomenal artist in his own right. Whether he's illustrating, he can illustrate. He's a film director. I did a film with him called The Puppet Apocalypse, which is a hilarious send-off of alien puppets invade the world, and we all get turned to puppets, and it's really fun. And just he's a mad genius, the guy. But he had suggested, what if we were to do a graphic novel? And it was a huge undertaking, unfortunately, which is one of the things that made it maybe not practical for us to approach it that way. But I just recently, because I read a lot of actor and musician autobiographies and biographies, and of all people, Andrew McCarthy just put out his book, and he kept it really brief, focused on the years that were his biggest years. And he managed to, I love the book and I love what he did with it. And then it made me start to realize maybe if I could focus on those key years, the alcoholism, the drug addiction, where I'm at now, how I view it now, touch a little bit on my upbringing, that maybe there would be something there, and it would be a fun project and maybe something too that could possibly help somebody. But
what about go ahead.
I really respect the craft of writing, and I don't consider myself a writer in this way that I just really respect the process. And if I can't do it 110%, I definitely would need somebody. I definitely would want a co-author just to keep me in a zone and focused. And, once there was a budget for it, but that changed when the original Clerks 3 was off the table. Now that it's back, there might be a chance that could happen within the next year or two. But
what would the budget be for?
Well, just money for.
I get you. Yeah, so to be able to sit and write something like that, yeah.
But and also to be able to have somebody as a co-author,
right? To hire
who could, right.
Well, you know what? It's sometimes like obviously I do music, you do music, I act, you act. My initial background was in visual art, so I know how it is to switch between like these different realms. And sometimes if you're to get into writing, it's almost like you have to be. For me, you have to go down a rabbit hole and just really be in that zone, right? And then when you come back to it, you have to look at it and go, well, that's crap, or this is pretty good here. Let's try this trail. It's a different ball of wax than music or acting. That's all I got to say. It's different.
Absolutely. And, I have a bunch of, not a bunch, but I have a handful of what I started to call just preliminary chapters of ideas. I started throwing things down. And with my creative writing, with Vicious Dogs, because it was poetry and prose and short stories based on somebody who was sort of in a very strange consciousness, I had a lot of liberties I could take. But doing it without that.
Well, what if you were to add something like that in there? Because like what I'm getting, it's almost like you have a dialogue with yourself as the Scott of today versus the Scott of like 1992. And you could literally write a dialogue, since you're an actor and you're used to looking at scripts. Maybe you could have the two talk about the scenes and set up the scene, and the scene could be the chapter about what happened, or how,
right. That could be an interesting way to approach it.
Just like something off, even if you don't go with that entirely. That those dialogues might be a way to.
Oh, very helpful. Yeah, it's almost like. Going back and watching a performance on film, how critical we are.
Yeah.
And when reading, that's it. Those words would be set in stone, so to speak, once you're done. And so much of it I would read and go, oh God, like I thought I loved it while I was writing it. Then when I'm reading it back, I wasn't loving it at all, which is why I would probably be looking for somebody who I could really trust as a co-author, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can find someone, who can bring that spark out of you.
We'll see with that. I'm sorry. This thing's going off and I wanted to shut it off. I just want to make sure there's no emergencies with my loved one. Oh no, everything's fine. Beautiful. Okay. We can never get away from these things. I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe this is a good spot to sign off, Scott.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you for your time and for all the support and you've shown me over the years in the friendship. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure, sir. My honor.
I do admire everything you are doing and have done since we worked together as actors. But I think the biggest takeaway I usually will end on is I feel very blessed to have had the opportunities I've had as a result of that crazy little filthy black and white film that somehow is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. And it's a kick-ass film. It still holds the test of time, I think. And it really, you think about that, it's one of those films back in the day that launched a lot of auteurs making independent film, and it launched the whole independent film craze. And a lot of people have a lot to thank Kevin Smith and you folks for putting the time into that. I'm sure it was a crazy shoot.
Yeah, well, but I'm glad you mentioned that. That's one of the most beautiful things about it too. One of the things we all hear quite often is how the movie inspired me to write. The movie inspired me to do my own movie. The movie inspired me to do my own comic book. People were very inspired by the film to do their own art. And that's an amazing thing.
Well, in a way, it's like it's the least glamorous film ever.
Right. Amy Tom, one of the funniest critiques we ever were given was in a soundbite, makes absence of style a virtue. That not that's the greatest thing ever, right?
It's such an honest fucking film. I mean, it really is. I mean, it takes balls to make that film. It really did. It is. It's hard to not like. There's very few films. What is something else that's kind of along that lines, but it has a little bit too much. Well, maybe just a little bit too much style to be of that same caliber. Living in Oblivion. You ever see that with Steve Buscemi?
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
But I mean, it's like that film is it's so watchable and so funny, man. I watched that the other day with not too long ago with my wife, and she's like, "I've never seen this. This is great." And it's so refreshing to see a film that's honest and doesn't attempt to try and use any kind of slick edits. And yeah, exactly. No, that Clerks is not a glamorous film, and I was even going to add, it is a working class person's film. There's very few films that are like from the gut, like that's a Jersey, or it could be a Detroit. It could be anywhere, working class, and I think that's what people identified with. Many people, it was like, wow, this is really honest, man.
There's a punk rock, what's the word I want?
Sensibility.
There's a punk rock aesthetic to the movie, even though he wasn't a punk rocker. It's a DIY, got a punk rock sort of feel, and that was another thing that really appealed to me once I saw the finished product. And And then we got that wonderful soundtrack from Sony. Sony came in and they gave Kevin almost his pick of the litter of some very high-end music. And for years, I remember a lot of people would tell me, "Oh, Jesus, the best thing about the film is the soundtrack," which was funny. But because, the soundtrack has dialogue sound bites, so you get a little bit of the movie in the soundtrack, which is fun. But yeah, man, it's just been a ride that I never could have anticipated. And again, just really blessed to have seen the ad, to have showed up, to have Kevin say, "Yeah, that's the guy I want to come back to read from the script," and eventually say, "Yeah, that's my Chuli's Gum guy." It was just the most wonderful experience because it just opened up a lot of doors. It closed some doors, and it opened up a lot of doors, obviously.
Yeah. Well, awesome.
Like any experience, yeah.
Okay. Well, on that note, thank you so much for staying up late.
I mean, I'm a vampire. I'll be up all night anyway.
All right. Well, I'll call you for another interview in a couple hours here.
All right, brother.
If you're sucking blood out of somebody's neck, I won't bother you. Don't pick up the phone. Cheers. Bye.
All right, brother.
Thanks for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know that the Psychology Talk podcast has a Facebook page and an Instagram page? It's true. You can find more information about other guests and episodes, as well as more information about psychology and mental health. And if you liked this episode, go ahead and like us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, or Spotify and leave a review. It helps us grow our audience and provide more quality shows. All material, copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.